Hey guys, tonight we begin a very chilly little journey. You've just blinked into existence, in a muddy little village somewhere in 14th century Europe, smack in the middle of a medieval winter. There's snow crusted on your eyebrows, your shoes are gone. How? You just got here, and the fire in front of you has, gone out. Welcome to your new life, where freeze to death isn't a metaphor, it's the weather forecast. So, before you get comfortable, take a moment to like the video and subscribe, but only if you genuinely enjoy what I do here. And hey, I'd love to know where you're listening from and what time it is there. Drop your city and time in the comments below. Now, dim the lights, maybe turn on a fan for that soft background hum, and let's ease into tonight's journey together. You're shivering. Not in a poetic, tragic kind of way, more like in a my teeth are clapping Morse code way. The wind howls like it's personally offended by your presence, slapping your ears, slicing right through your... What is that? A torn tunic? A burlap sack? Oh, it's technically a shirt. Adorable. Your feet crunch on a half-frozen mud path. You're ankle-deep in slush, and each step sends a polite but firm reminder. Medieval winter is not here to play. There are no street lights, no car engines humming in the background, no convenience stores offering hot cocoa. Just darkness, the smell of smoke from distant chimneys, and the distant yowl of what you sincerely hope is a cat. You stumble into a village square, or what passes for one. A few thatched roof cottages squat around a well, their windows dark. A church looms on the edge, its bell tower frozen in time and temperature. There's nobody around. Not because they don't want to welcome you, but because they're inside trying not to die. You're already learning rule number 1 of surviving the medieval winter. Don't stand still. If the cold doesn't get you, the wolves might. Yes, wolves. Real ones. Not metaphorical, emotional wolves. We're past that now. You look down at your hands, red, raw, and trembling. Fun fact, frostbite starts with numbness. Even more fun fact, they don't have antibiotics here. If you lose a toe, you lose it forever. Want to keep your fingers? Better start moving. You pick a direction, any direction, and stumble toward a cottage. The door is barred from the inside. You knock. Nothing. You knock again. Still nothing. A dog barks. Somewhere in the village, a shutter slams. You are not being invited in for soup. It's not personal. In fact, it's deeply practical. If they let you in, it means they're giving up precious heat. Every human body is like a tiny furnace, and in a one-room cottage with barely any insulation, that's the only thing standing between the family and a very stiff spring. You remember something about people in this era sleeping in shifts, huddled like spoons in a drawer. Not romantic, not warm, just necessary. Space is survival. You, unfortunately, are not part of their calorie budget. You keep walking. There's a barn up ahead. A low wooden structure, half buried in snowdrifts. Inside, there's a faint glow. Maybe a lantern, or maybe just the collective body heat of livestock. It smells like hay and animal dung and, strangely enough, hope. You slide the door open and peek inside. Cows. A few sheep. One particularly judgmental-looking pig. They glance at you like you've ruined their quiet night, which, to be fair, you have. But pigs are warm and hay is softer than snow, and nobody here is kicking you out. This is the best offer you've had all evening. You ease into the hay, curl up beside the pig, who grunts in protest, then goes back to sleep, and try to stop shaking. Your ears feel like glass, your nose is dripping like a broken faucet, and your brain is frantically calculating how far you are from hypothermia. You don't know the answer, but it feels close. Very close. As you lie there, wrapped in straw and shame, a few thoughts occur to you. 1. You are not wearing socks. 2. You're definitely going to have to find food tomorrow. 3. You didn't even make it one full day before ending up as a barn hobo. Welcome to the chill. And here's a little historical nugget to warm your curiosity. If not your limbs, most medieval villagers didn't really live through winter. They endured it. Winter was less of a season and more of an annual boss battle, where the odds were wildly stacked against you unless you were rich, lucky, or part sheep. In fact, some historians argue that up to 10% of rural populations might not survive a particularly bad winter, and that's a conservative estimate. Starvation, frostbite, pneumonia, and, yes, wolves were all on the table. And not metaphorically. Sometimes literally. Even those who did survive the season often emerged with missing digits, chronic illnesses, and a 1,000-yard stare that said, "I once had to eat boiled leather." And here's the kicker. The year you've landed in might be one of the coldest on record. During the so-called Little Ice Age, which lasted roughly from the 14th to 19th centuries, Europe experienced periodic plunges in temperature that froze crops, rivers, and hope itself. Academic side note, historians still debate exactly how cold it got, and whether it was uniform across regions, but the villagers weren't exactly keeping weather journals. You close your eyes, breathing in the scent of hay and pig in desperation. Tomorrow you'll have to find proper clothes. Maybe shoes. Maybe a human bed. Maybe some bread that doesn't have blue spots on it. But for now, you huddle deeper into the straw, whisper a prayer to no one in particular, and try to sleep. Because this was just your first night. And trust me, it gets worse. You wake up stiff, itchy, and colder than when you fell asleep. The pig has abandoned you. Probably offended by your snoring or the way you drooled on the hay. Either way, you're alone again, wrapped in straw and regret. And now your back hurts. Because surprise, medieval hay is not a memory foam mattress. Hey, you try to stand up, but your knees snap like frozen twigs. Your breath fogs the air, and your toes have disappeared, metaphorically for now, though you're starting to worry they might make a literal exit soon. Step 1 today. Find real clothes. Because what you're wearing doesn't count. It's technically clothing, in the sense that it covers bits of you, but it has the thermal integrity of a damp paper bag. You peek outside the barn. Still snowing. Still miserable. You make your way, slowly creaking like an old gate, back to the village center. A few villagers are stirring now. Bundled up in layers of wool and old cloaks, they trudge past you with the same expression. I don't have time to notice another shivering idiot. You shuffle toward the small market stall by the well. It's more like a pile of crates than a real shop. A hunched old woman with one eye and two teeth is selling something. It might be turnips. It might be rocks. Hard to tell. You ask her where you might find something warm to wear. She squints at you like you've just requested a pet dragon. Wool, she croaks, ain't for the likes of you. And that's when you learn the first heartbreaking truth of medieval winter fashion. Wool is for winners. Wool, glorious, insulating, water-resistant wool, is expensive. Sheep need land, care, and several uncomfortably intimate shearing sessions. And once that wool is harvested, it has to be cleaned, carded, spun, and woven, all by hand. That makes it more valuable than most of your internal organs. In this economy, only the relatively wealthy can afford real wool garments. The villagers you see wrapped in wool cloaks likely inherited them, patched and repatched across generations. It's not fashion, it's survival. And even they don't have extra to spare. What's available to you? Let's see. There's linen, thin, scratchy, poorly dyed linen. There's sackcloth, literal bags turned into tunics. There's a suspicious pile of stitched-together rabbit skins that may or may not be crawling. And of course there are heritage garments. Someone's great-grandpa's moldy undershirt with more holes than fabric. You rummage through the heap and choose the least disgusting tunic. It smells like fermented onions, but at least it covers your arms. You add a patched-up cloak, half-burnt on one side, and a scarf that might be a sock. Congratulations. You now look like a low-budget extra from a medieval zombie film. But hey, you're slightly warmer. Let's talk underwear. There isn't any. Not for commoners. No thermal long johns, no heat tech leggings. Just a long linen shirt, called a chemise or smock, which also doubles as sleepwear, sweat absorber, and occasionally a rag. If you're lucky, you might find woolen hose. Long socks that tie at the waist, basically medieval leggings. If you're not lucky, it's bare thighs and frostbite. And shoes? Forget shoes. Okay, not entirely. Some people have shoes made of stiff leather or thick cloth wrapped around the feet like desperate Christmas presents. But soles wear down quickly. Repairs are constant. Waterproofing is non-existent. You see a child clomping past in wooden clogs, looking like a walking percussion instrument. You manage to barter for a pair of mismatched boots, one slightly burned, one crusted with something that might be dung. But they fit, mostly, and they're yours. Fun historical side note. Medieval shoes didn't have left and right distinctions. They were symmetrical, foot agnostic, and flat as pancakes. Arch support? Not invented yet. Socks? Only if your grandma could knit. Oh, and shoelaces? Ropes. Strips of cloth. Hope and a prayer. You spot a man across the square, clearly a merchant or someone richer than average, wearing a full-length woolen cloak with fur trim. He looks like royalty. You look like someone who's about to be kicked out of a tavern for bringing down the tone. You glare at him. He glares back, then disappears inside a well-built cottage. His boots didn't squish when he walked. Yours do. Let's shift to a weird little historical tidbit. There was a belief in some medieval communities that wearing red helped keep you warm. Not because it actually traps heat, but because red was associated with vitality and heat in folk medicine. So you'll occasionally see paintings of people in red stockings or cloaks, not because they were stylish, but because it was believed to ward off chills. Does it work? No. But when you're freezing to death, placebo counts. And now, the academic tension. Historians still argue about how much clothing the average peasant actually owned. Some records suggest peasants had only one outfit, maybe two if they were well off. Others believe rural folk had multiple layers, though mostly made of coarse, low-grade materials. Inventories from the period often list one tunic, one shirt, one pair of hose, and that's it. Laundry was rare. Rewearing was the norm. Smell was expected. You trudge back toward the barn, arms full of itchy hope. You feel slightly more human. Slightly less likely to turn into a cautionary ice sculpture. And just before you reach the door, the wind picks up again. Or, sure, like a slap from nature itself. Your teeth resume their clacking. Your nose starts leaking again. And the left boot is definitely leaking something too. Welcome to day 2. You're still alive, but fashionably miserable. You wake up to the sound of snorting. Not yours this time. It's the pig again. He's back and he's judging you hard. You shift under the scratchy wool cloak thing you slept in, trying not to startle him. Not out of fear, but because, well, you need him. For warmth. Yes, you've reached that point. You inch closer, gently pressing your icy fingers into his plump, slightly steamy flank. He grunts, rolls his eyes, you swear, and shifts a bit to give you half a degree more warmth. That's the closest thing to affection you'll find in this barn. Welcome to the great medieval cuddle economy. Because here's the truth, you're not sleeping alone tonight. You don't get your own bed. Heck, you barely get your own straw pile. In fact, your bed is usually just a corner of a shared wooden platform if you're lucky, or a bare patch of floor if you're not. And if you think the solution is just ask for your own space, congrats. You've officially misunderstood every economic, social, and architectural aspect of medieval peasant life. Let's take a little tour of your housing situation. You've found shelter in what's essentially a 2-room shack. One room is for people. The other? Animals. Sometimes there's no wall between the two. Sometimes the animals get the warm side. You know what produces consistent body heat, doesn't complain, and stays mostly in one spot? A cow. Or 3. Or, in your current case, a pig with the self-esteem of a small landlord. This arrangement isn't weird, it's strategic. Animals give off heat. They warm the space. And while they may poop in corners and occasionally step on your foot, they're also the difference between frostbite and survival. People slept near animals on purpose, and not just for convenience, it was necessary insulation. The term for this kind of living? Byre dwelling. It literally means you share your living space with livestock. Scholars believe it was the norm for much of the rural population in colder regions of medieval Europe. It sounds undignified now, but back then, it was just smart. Speaking of dignity, let's talk about who you're sleeping next to besides animals. Last night was solo-ish. But tonight? You've been invited, and by invited we mean expected, to sleep in the village house where they're cramming every relative, neighbor and seasonal laborer into one bed. For warmth, efficiency, and because frankly beds are rarer than teeth in this town. The bed is a situation. It's a raised wooden platform with ropes crisscrossed underneath like an early medieval trampoline. There's a straw-stuffed sack on top, and over that, a heavy linen sheet that crunches when you move. On top of that is a coarse woolen blanket that smells like boiled cabbage and old fear. The family has already claimed their sides. You're given a spot in the middle. To maximize warmth, they say. You suspect it's to prevent you from rolling away. There's the father who snores like an ox with sinus issues. The mother who coughs every 12 seconds. 2 kids. And grandma. Grandma is spry, suspiciously warm, and takes up more space than she reasonably should. And now you. Here's the fun bit. This is a standard medieval sleeping arrangement. Families slept together not just because beds were limited, but because body heat is currency. Sleeping solo was a luxury of the upper classes, or those crazy enough to try. Also, this was often the only room in the house that could be heated, sort of. The cooking hearth would radiate a little warmth, and the thick walls, if stuffed with mud or straw, trapped some of it in. But it wasn't cozy. It was barely survivable. Oh, and that phrase, sleep tight? That's medieval. The ropes holding up the straw mattress would sag over time, and you'd have to pull them tight to get decent support. So yes, sleep tight was quite literal. The don't let the bedbugs bite part? Tragically literal too. Now the air in the room is thick, with smells, wood smoke, dample, breath, unwashed bodies, a faint note of turnip stew, and then someone farts. There's no escaping. You pretend to be asleep. You cling to the idea that you're building character. And just as you begin to doze off, Grandma starts humming a hymn. It's oddly soothing. You let your eyes close. The fire crackles in the hearth. The pig shifts in the next room. Everyone is snoring, wheezing, or softly whispering old stories. And in this strange, cramped pile of limbs and blankets, you feel something weirdly close to warmth. Not physical necessarily, but communal. You are not alone. Small side note for the trivia lovers. Some historical records suggest that communal sleeping, even with strangers, was common practice in inns and travelers' hostels. You'd rent a space on a mattress, not a private room. Travelers who couldn't afford beds sometimes slept upright on benches near the hearth, heads resting on their knees. If you were really unlucky, you'd pay a penny to sleep in a sitting position, tied to a rope stretched across the room. They'd cut the rope in the morning to wake everyone up. Medieval version of bunk beds, basically. With a health hazard bonus. Academic fun fact. Historians debate how intimate these arrangements were. There's evidence of bundling, where unmarried couples slept in the same bed with a wooden board or sack between them. Some think it encouraged innocent courtship. Others think it was a recipe for disaster. Either way, it was cold out, and moral judgment often took a nap when the temperature dropped below freezing. Back to your bed. The blanket slips off your shoulder. Someone mutters and pulls it back. Your feet are tangled with someone else's. There is no personal space. There is only not touching the wall, which is basically a glacier. Outside, the wind howls like a wolf with performance anxiety. But inside, you're a little warmer. Not comfortable. Not clean. But you're surviving. And in medieval winter, that's winning. You fall asleep to the creak of wood, the smell of smoke, and the quiet, rhythmic sound of someone chewing in their sleep. Maybe it's the pig. You don't even care. So, you've survived a couple of nights by sleeping with pigs and strangers. Not great, but hey, you didn't freeze to death. Yet. Now you're awake. Cold, stiff, maybe a little crusty. The fire's out. Your fingers don't bend quite right. And the worst part? You need to relight the fire. Sounds easy, right? You just grab a lighter or flick on the stove and... Wait. Oh no. You're in the 14th century. There are no lighters. No matches. No electric stoves. No anything that would make this even slightly convenient. In fact, starting a fire in medieval winter is basically a nightmare side quest from a survival game. Except you can't rage quit. Let's walk through the process. First, you need something to burn. Firewood? That's adorable. You think you're rich? Unless you chopped and dried your own 6 months ago, it's not happening. Most villagers don't even have enough trees nearby. Forests were often owned by the local lord or the church, and taking wood without permission could get you fined. Or whipped. Or both. So what do you burn? Turf. Peat. Dried cow dung. Yes. You're literally holding a chunk of compacted grass and manure brick, hoping it'll keep your toes intact. It smells like betrayal but burns surprisingly slow and hot. Efficient. Depressing. Second, you need a spark. Remember? Matches were still a few hundred years away. Your best bet is flint and steel, a rock and a metal edge. You strike them together, aiming at a small pile of tinder, dry straw, shaved bark, or some poor soul's shredded tunic. If you're lucky, a tiny orange spark jumps off. You hold your breath. The spark flares and dies. You try again and again. Your hands are shaking from cold. The skin on your knuckles cracks open and starts to bleed. You're muttering things that would definitely get you in trouble with the priest. Eventually, miraculously, a whisper of smoke appears. The ember catches. You drop it into the dung/turf pile like it's the crown jewels. You blow on it gently, hoping not to sneeze and ruin everything. The flame takes. It's weak. It's sad. It's still better than nothing. Fire in medieval winter is everything. It's warmth, yes, but also light, cooking, protection, and emotional support. Without it, your house turns into a freezer. Your food is just raw lumps. Your chances of dying from exposure? Sky high. But here's the kicker. Even if you get it going, you can't keep it going all night. Most homes didn't have chimneys, just a hole in the roof. So smoke billowed around the room, choking everyone softly into unconsciousness. That's why fires were usually put out at night. Not for safety but for survival. So every morning you start from scratch. There's a fun little invention some families used called a fire pot. An insulated clay vessel where they stored hot coals overnight under ash. If you're lucky and the gods of heat favor you, there might be enough glowing embers in the pot to rekindle the flame in the morning. If not, back to dung smashing and flint clicking. You know who didn't have to deal with this nonsense? Rich people. The manor house down the road? Multiple hearths. Dry wood. Servants who did the fire starting for them. Even a chimney if they were lucky. But don't get too excited, even they froze sometimes. Castles were made of stone, and stone is the worst thermal material in the universe. You could be rich and still watch your soup freeze mid-sentence. There's even a record from the 13th century describing how Queen Eleanor of Provence, yes, a literal queen, ordered fur-lined wall hangings to be brought in during winter because her rooms were too cold. And she was in a palace. You'd be thrilled if your walls didn't leak wind. Academic hot take. There's still debate among historians about how common chimney usage was in medieval Europe. Some argue that by the 12th century, chimneys had become widespread in wealthier homes. Others think they remained rare until the 15th. Either way, if you're living in a thatched-roof peasant cottage, don't expect sophisticated smoke management. Expect your lungs to sting. Now that you've got a fire going, it's time to sit near it. Not too near. You've already ruined one pair of hose by getting too close. Singed wool smells like old despair. But you hover close enough to feel the heat spread up your ankles. You can finally flex your toes again. This is luxury. You think you'll warm up a pot of water. Maybe make some soup? Nice try. The pot's cracked. The water's frozen solid. The ladle broke last night. And the only edible thing you've got is, you guessed it, a questionable root vegetable. You toss it in anyway. The fire sputters in protest. Back in the day, lighting and maintaining a fire wasn't just a daily task. It was a job. Some households even appointed a dedicated person, usually a woman, just to manage it. In wealthier homes, she might be called the firekeeper. In poorer ones, she was just mom. And when the fire went out, everyone panicked. You might run to a neighbor's house, hoping to borrow fire before the ember cooled completely. That's not poetic metaphor. That's literally how it worked. Fire was shared like water, like air. It was community survival. But it wasn't always safe. Thatched roofs plus open flame equals medieval disaster waiting to happen. Whole villages burned down regularly. Sometimes because of a knocked-over candle, sometimes because a toddler tripped into the hearth while chasing a rat. One misplaced spark and boom, your house, your neighbor's house, half the town. All gone. Insurance? What's that? There's even an old medieval law in some English towns requiring all fires to be covered at night with a special metal lid, called a curfew. Yep, that's where the word comes from. Couvre-feu in French, cover the fire. The fire had a bedtime. You had to comply. You look down now at your little flame. It's wobbling, casting long shadows on the damp walls. You feel warm enough to think, to plan, maybe even to hum a tune. You've beaten the fire game. Today. But you already know the cold is waiting. Tonight it comes again. And tomorrow you start all over. And that, dear time traveler, is why every medieval peasant had soot-stained hands and permanent anxiety. You weren't lazy. You weren't weak. You were just one misfired spark away from catastrophe. But hey, at least your pig's warm. Your hands are finally warming up. The fire's crackling, not thanks to anything fancy, just dried cow dung and some questionably sourced timber. You rub your palms together and decide it's time to reward your stomach. You're hungry. Not, I could eat something hungry. We're talking, I might gnaw on the furniture level. You rummage around for food, hoping for something even vaguely edible. On the table there's a chunk of black bread, and calling it bread is being polite. It's rock hard, black as midnight, and could probably double as a weapon. Medieval black bread was made to last, not to please. Preserved through mold and sheer stubbornness, biting into it feels like chewing on time itself. You think about making soup. A warm soup. You deserve that, right? Then reality slaps you colder than the air outside. In a medieval winter, hot food equals actual miracle. To make anything warm, you need a pot. Not everyone has one. Water, you'll need to go outside and break the ice. And fuel, you just barely manage to get this fire going. Cooking is less of a chore and more of a sacrament. An act of survival alchemy performed with trembling fingers. You scrape some snow into a cracked clay pot, toss in a few scraps from yesterday's bone pile, a bit of straw, and something that might have once been a carrot peel. Congratulations. You've made medieval vegetable stew. You take a sip. It's warm, which is something. The taste? Imagine dirt mixed with a salty gas. Suddenly you understand the phrase, boil the boots. It's not a metaphor. People literally boiled boots. Leather shoes would be stewed for hours, then scraped for a gelatinous goo. Supposedly edible. You glance at your tattered boots. Not yet. But almost. Let's talk about medieval food. First off, there are no fresh vegetables in sight. You're not a noble. No greenhouses, no trade routes. The best you can hope for is salted cabbage, dried peas, or maybe turnips if someone buried them properly last fall. Forget the idea of dinner tables. Most meals happen sitting around a smoky hearth. The pot goes in the middle. Everyone grabs what they can as fast as they can. You nibble the edge of your black bread, trying to trick yourself into feeling full. It's so hard you use a small knife to shave it like bark. Then you find some porridge. A thick paste of barley, old grains, possibly a few insect legs if you're lucky. Sounds awful. According to historians, this was one of the most reliable food sources. You think farmers pulled plows on good vibes alone? And then there's beer for breakfast. No, not because they liked to party. Water was often contaminated, and weak, fermented ale was actually safer. Even kids drank it. You take a sip. It's sour enough to slap your soul awake. Taste? Doesn't matter. Eating is about staying alive. If you're still upright after a meal, that's 5 stars. Kitchen gear? What kitchen? You look around, hoping to find something usable. The pot has a crack. The ladle is just a scooped-out chunk of wood. The cutting board is the floor. Spices? Don't even ask. Salt is a maybe. Pepper is a fantasy worth its weight in silver. Most folks live and die without tasting it. Well, rare. Maybe a scrap of pig fat if you're lucky, which makes the soup shiny but horrifying. Here's a fun twist. In some parts of medieval Europe, eating hot food during certain church fasts was considered indulgent. Some monasteries banned it altogether. So, if you drank something warm today, congratulations, your soul is in danger. Raw food isn't trendy. It's just what you have. You find some dried meat, likely salted last year. It's sour, chewy, and suspect. But you eat it. Because in this era, winter starvation is real. How many people starved each year? No one knows for sure. Historians argue about the numbers. But during the Great Famine of 1315 to 1317, England alone lost around 10% of its population. You're not having a meal. You're wrestling winter for your life. And in times like these, people turn to anything that might help. Folktales say garlic in your boots wards off hunger. Others say chewing hazelnuts in a blizzard calms the spirit. Is it science? No. But when you're that hungry, you'll believe in anything. A fun cold fact. Some villages handed out blessed bread during Candlemas, February 2nd. A symbolic snack meant to say, spring is near. Trouble is that biscuit's the size of a coin and spring feels like a lie. You finished lunch. It might be your only meal today. You wipe the last drop of oil from the rim of the bowl and lean back toward the fire. The flame flickers low. You'll have to save wood for the night. You touch your stomach. Still empty. But you're alive. And in a medieval winter, that alone is something to celebrate. You wake up to a biting wind slithering through the cracks in the walls. You pull your thin blanket tighter, but it doesn't help. Your nose is frozen. Your toes are missing. Well, not literally, but it feels like they've filed a resignation letter. And then your bladder gently reminds you, hey buddy, we've got a situation. You hold it. For as long as humanly possible. Because here's the deal. In the medieval winter, going to the toilet isn't just inconvenient, it's a full-on Arctic expedition. Welcome to the outdoor bathroom experience. Let's start with the obvious. There is no indoor plumbing. Unless you're in a castle or monastery, you're not. Your toilet is either a hole in the ground, a wooden bench over a pit, or if you're lucky, a communal outhouse a few feet from the door. You crack open the wooden door and the wind punches you in the face like an angry ghost. The snow is ankle deep. Your boots are stiff from last night's freeze. Your fingers are already screaming and you haven't even left the house. You trudge through the snow. Every step is a betrayal. You pray you don't slip. Or worse, fall into the pit. Yes, that's a thing. The frozen cesspit nightmare. See, medieval toilets weren't just gross. They were dangerous. The waste pit beneath the outhouse could freeze over on top while staying mushy and active underneath. If the wood is rotten or your foot placement is off, well, let's just say no one wants to be the person who fell into a frozen medieval latrine. It's cold. It's humiliating. And it's historically documented. Yes, this really happened. More than once. You finally reach the outhouse, do what must be done, quickly, and race back to the house like your life depends on it. Because honestly, it kind of does. Frostbite isn't a buzzword here. It's a lifestyle hazard. And what if you're sick? Too bad. You're not allowed to stay warm inside, especially if your bodily functions are causing unclean smells. There's a strong belief that bad air causes disease, So you're either banned to a corner of the hut or politely told to enjoy the great frozen outdoors. Got diarrhea? No one's helping you dig a hole in the snow. Good luck. But what about the rich? Well, the nobles had garderobes, small stone closets hanging off castle walls, sometimes directly over rivers or moats. The waste just dropped out into the abyss. Sounds better, right? Not really. In winter, everything freezes, including the pipes, the chutes, and yes, the poop. Even the castle elite had to deal with frozen waste backing up. Some reportedly shoved hot irons down the chute to melt it. You, however, don't have that option. You're still outside, hoping not to step in anything regrettable. Water? Icy quest item. Okay, you're back inside. You want to wash your hands. Adorable. Water in this house is stored in a big wooden barrel. It's outside naturally because there's no room in here. The top is frozen. Solid. You chip away at it using the back of a spoon and hope the layer underneath is drinkable. Remember, boiling water takes fuel, which you're trying to save for not freezing to death. So you splash some slush on your hands and call it a day. So, cute. At best, you've got a ball of lard mixed with ash. At worst, it's sand. Want to bathe? Hope you're patient. Bathing in winter isn't a thing people do. Not because they don't want to, but because it's borderline impossible. You need water, frozen, heat, expensive, privacy, non-existent, and time, yeah, I know. For most medieval folks, a full body wash might happen once or twice a season, usually in spring. Some do a little rinse of the important bits, using a cloth and cold water, but in January, that cloth freezes mid-swipe. Historians still argue how often people bathed in winter. Some say it was almost never. Others claim folks did dry scrubs with linen and herbs. Either way, the point stands. You're going to stink. And so is everyone else. But good news, no one's judging because no one smells good. Cold water plus metal equals pain. You notice the iron ladle is sticking out of the water bucket. It's covered in frost. You go to grab it and ouch. Your fingers almost fuse to the handle. Metal in the cold is a medieval horror story. Ever wonder how people burn their skin in winter? It wasn't fire, it was frozen iron. Pro tip, don't touch your face. You've noticed your nose is always runny. Everyone's is. But you can't wipe it on your sleeve, because your sleeve is frozen, crusted with days of condensation and possibly attached to your skin now. You let it drip. It's fine. No one cares. This is the time before tissues. If you're really fancy, you might have a bit of cloth. If not, well, you get creative. A medieval writer once noted that many peasants used the edge of their tunic or simply the wind. You do both. Nature provides. Little kids, big problems. Imagine trying to toilet train a toddler in this weather. You hear a neighbor screaming because their child slipped on ice while squatting outside. There are no diapers. No plastic potties. Just buckets. And screaming. You pull your blanket tighter around your shoulders. You made it through the morning bathroom experience without losing a toe. You didn't fall in the pit. Your hands only froze a little. You take that as a win. Outside, the snow keeps falling. Inside, your stomach growls again, but you're too tired to chew black bread. You lie down. Maybe if you sleep early, you'll skip hunger altogether. Just one more night. Just a few more hours of not dying. That's your winter mantra. Your nose is red, your fingers are swollen, and your joints have officially unionized to protest the cold. Still, you're trying to stay positive. Until someone notices your feet. Looks like you got the chill rot, says the local healer, squinting at your toes like she's reading ancient runes. You peek. Yep, they're purple. And not in a regal way. Time to explore medieval cold remedies. A subject that lands somewhere between folk wisdom and fantasy novel side quest. The village healer has ideas. Her hut smells like damp straw and questionable decisions. She gestures for you to sit. She's got a solution for your toes. Bind them with a raw frog and chant a prayer to Saint Apollonia. You blink. Is this a prank? She's serious. The belief is that the cold enters your body through the skin, and the frog, being frog-shaped, can suck the frost out. You nod politely. You've never been so desperate to keep your toes, so you go with it. Frog on foot treatment. Officially happening. Historically? Yep, that kind of thing really was practiced. Medieval cold cures were less about science and more about vibes. And sometimes, frogs. You're prescribed garlic, wine, and donkey milk. Day 2. You've got chills, a cough, and a feeling that medieval winter is slowly winning. So the healer prescribes a concoction of garlic steeped in wine, followed by a steam bath using donkey milk and dried sage. You're not entirely sure if this is medicine or a marinade. Spoiler: garlic was considered a kind of universal defense back then, used against everything from infections to vampires, probably. Wine was antiseptic. Donkey milk was believed to be closest to human milk, and good for delicate bodies. You drink the garlic wine brew. It burns like betrayal. Then you sit in a barrel filled with lukewarm donkey milk, which cools to room temperature in approximately 40 seconds, leaving you both wet and freezing. The healer seems pleased. Less so. Your neighbor swears by goose fat. You meet someone outside spreading a thick, shiny layer of goose fat on his chest like it's medieval Vicks Vapor Rub. I haven't been sick since I started doing this, he says proudly, slipping a tunic over the grease like it's perfectly normal. Which, in this timeline, it is. People in the Middle Ages used animal fat as insulation, skin ointment, and even as a base for rudimentary candles. It traps heat and locks in body moisture, which sounds good until your armpits smell like stew. Desperate, you try it. Now you're sticky, cold, and smell like dinner. Everyone has an opinion, no one has a clue. In a town of 80 people, there are 170 different winter cures. Drink cold water while facing east. Wrap your legs in nettles to draw the heat inward. Sleep on a sheep's stomach. One man insists on chewing pine needles, which, to be fair, do have vitamin C. But still, pine needles. History note: historians today still debate which, if any, of these treatments helped. Some herbs like willow bark, source of modern aspirin, did contain real medicinal compounds. Others were symbolic, placebo, or just gross. But when you've been sneezing for 4 days and you can't feel your toes, you'll try anything. You hear whispers of a magical cure: boil the cold out. Someone tells you about a bathhouse in the next village over, a place where steam rooms still exist, where water is warm, where you can boil the cold out of your bones. You start walking, delirious with hope. Turns out it's a shack with a fire pit, 2 buckets, and 3 other half-naked villagers already inside. One of them is aggressively coughing. You back away slowly. Soaking in hot water might help with circulation, sure. But sharing that water with strangers who haven't bathed in months? Bold choice. Also, you need fuel to heat that bath. And firewood isn't free. So instead, you do what everyone else does: suffer creatively. You develop your own routine. By now you've learned the hard way what works, barely, and what doesn't, everything. In the morning you rub your hands with straw until they sting. Before bed, you wrap your feet in warm stones, if you can find any. You even started sleeping with a boiled onion near your pillow because some guy told you it absorbs illness. You line your boots with moss. Not bad actually. Keeps in heat. Also makes your feet smell like a woodland fairy got tired of everything. You learn to sleep sitting up when your sinuses are too frozen to breathe lying down. You drink hot ale when you can. Alcohol doesn't cure anything, but it feels warm, which sometimes is enough. Your frog foot is still happening. You're too afraid to stop in case it is working. The academic verdict: still unclear. Modern scholars aren't sure whether medieval people genuinely believed all these remedies or if they were just desperate improvisations. Some rituals blended pagan beliefs with Christian saints, while others were passed down orally for generations. No one's quite sure where the line is between superstition, survival, and placebo. But one thing's clear: people were trying. You're trying. And that has to count for something. Your body is adapting. A weird thing happens around day 20. You stop feeling as cold. Not because it's warmer, oh no, the wind is worse than ever, but because your body has adjusted. Sort of. You've learned not to cry, tears freeze. You've accepted that numb fingers are just fingers now. You no longer hope to be warm. You just aim for not actively dying. And that, weirdly, feels like progress. Tonight, as you rub some goose fat on your cheeks, sniffle your way into bed, and whisper a quick thank you to the frog tied to your foot, you feel oddly okay. Alive. Just barely. But alive. And that's enough. You're beginning to accept that medieval winter isn't just a season, it's a lifestyle. A damp, grueling, hay-scented lifestyle. You know what's weird? You start to envy the pigs. No, really, because tonight you're watching them sleep. And they look cozy. Animal housing, human housing. You thought barns were grimy, chaotic places filled with flies, mud, and shouting farmers. Well, they are. But they're also surprisingly warm. Unlike your drafty shack of a hut, barns trap body heat, especially when they're full of livestock. Cows, pigs, goats, they're basically walking space heaters. Snorting, farting, cuddly radiators. You lean over the wooden railing of the pig pen, contemplating life. Your breath fogs in front of you. Inside the pen, a couple of plump pigs have burrowed into straw. They're huddled together in a pile, steaming gently. You look at your own bed in the corner of your hut. Straw on damp earth, a mildewed blanket, and maybe a rat if you're lucky. The pigs are winning. Living with animals is not a joke. So you cave. You sneak into the barn at night, find a dryish patch of straw between a pig and a sleepy goat, and curl up. To your surprise, the pig doesn't mind. In fact, it grunts softly and shifts a little to make space. Pig hospitality, 10 out of 10. And in that moment, snuggled between livestock, wrapped in a smell you don't care to define, you feel the warmest you've felt in weeks. Historically speaking, you're doing what many did. In medieval Europe, it was common for poor families to live in the same building as their animals, separated by a wooden partition, if even that. Not just for space reasons, but because body heat equals survival. A cow can produce up to 1,000 watts of heat. That's like leaving a space heater on 24/7. Except it moves. Goats and pigs, though smaller, still radiate a decent amount of warmth, especially when packed together. It's not elegant, but it works. And when temperatures drop below freezing, dignity goes out the shattered, unglazed window. Animal hierarchy, you're at the bottom. After a few nights, you notice a social structure. The pigs claim the center of the straw pile. The goat takes a corner. The chickens, yes, chickens, huddle on a high beam above you, raining down occasional blessings of warmth and existential terror. You're allowed to lie near the edge. If you shift too much, a pig might grunt at you disapprovingly. And honestly, fair. You're the guest here. You learn quickly, move slowly, don't get between two animals mid-snuggle, and absolutely do not touch the rooster. Side effects of barn life. 1. Smell. You no longer notice it, but others do. The village baker literally winces when you walk by. 2. Lice. They're not just yours anymore. You are now a communal host. Congratulations. 3. Straw rash. It's itchy. It's everywhere. It's eternal. 4. Emotional stability. Weirdly, sleeping with animals is calming. They breathe. They don't ask questions. They don't care if your toes are purple. You begin to suspect this is the closest thing to therapy available in 14th century rural life. Manor, houses, and livestock roommates. Think the rich avoided this fate? Sort of. Even wealthier peasants kept animals close by during winter. Not in their beds, but certainly under the same roof. Many longhouses had animals at one end and humans at the other, divided by a low wooden wall. The animals' waste, even their breath, helped raise the internal temperature by a few degrees. In a medieval winter, that meant the difference between surviving and waking up stiff as a snowman. But did the nobility have to sleep with pigs? No. They had bigger problems like stone castles that trapped cold like a meat locker. More on that soon. Historical weirdness alert. Animal trials. Quick tangent, because it's too bizarre not to mention. In some parts of medieval Europe, animals could be put on trial. Like actual trials. With judges. And witnesses. Your cozy pig friend? If it stepped on the wrong priest's foot, it might end up in court for assault. This isn't totally related to freezing, but it does underscore something important. Animals weren't just background characters. In medieval society, they were essential, respected, feared, and sometimes sentenced. And in your case, they're roommates. You learn some animal tricks. You pick up some survival habits from your pen buddies. Pigs burrow. So now you do too. You create a proper nest in the straw, layering it around you like a burrito. A goat sleeps standing up sometimes. You try it once. Bad idea. Chickens rotate body heat positions. You notice the pigs doing it too. Subtly they shift throughout the night to share the warmest spots. You try to imitate this system. The pigs are unimpressed. But slowly you stop waking up with your teeth chattering. Your nose still runs. Your skin is still dry. But your core warmth? Not bad. Warm enough to start thinking again. Like, how long can I live like this? You're caught in a moral dilemma. Is this okay? Should a human sleep with pigs? You wonder what your modern self would say. But your frostbitten toes say, shut up, keep snuggling. And honestly, that feels like growth. You've let go of shame, of cleanliness, of the illusion that you're somehow above sharing your blanket and lice with barn animals. You've discovered something powerful. Survival isn't always heroic. Sometimes it's just dirty and weird and snorty. But you're alive, and warmer than you've been in weeks. And tonight, when you curl up in your straw bed, surrounded by pigs, with your face tucked into a warm patch of goat fluff, you don't feel like you're losing. You feel, dare we say it, almost comfortable. You wake up to the unmistakable scent of pig breath, faintly sweet and disturbingly warm. One of your bunkmates has rolled onto your foot during the night, and now your toes are wet. You're not going to ask questions. You stretch creakily. Your back protests. Your knees crack like old doors. But you're alive. And in medieval winter terms, that counts as a win. You step outside the barn. And that's when you realize your warmest, coziest sleep of the season just happened in a pigsty. Meanwhile, the humans? They're shivering in their huts like icicles with mortgages. So you try your luck with a bed. Not straw. Not barn floor, an actual bed, with planks, and maybe, just maybe, a blanket that wasn't last owned by a goat. After some very awkward bartering involving half a turnip and the promise of helping unload firewood, you secure a spot for the night at a neighbor's cottage. They agree to let you share the bed, with 3 other people. Welcome to the human hot pile. You open the door. The room is tiny, smoky, and dark. Windowless, of course. The bed? Technically a bed. It's a wooden platform covered in straw, furs, and people. There's already someone asleep on one end, wheezing softly. You step closer and someone shifts under the blanket. A hand emerges, wordlessly gesturing you to get in. So you do. You are now one link in the human sausage chain. Congratulations. Bed sharing, the medieval norm. See, in your time, sharing a bed with a stranger is a rom-com plot or a hotel overbooking disaster. In the Middle Ages, totally normal. Beds were expensive. Not just the frame, but the mattress, the straw, the cloth, all labor-intensive. So people shared. Relentlessly. Sometimes a whole family. Sometimes workers. Sometimes travelers. Sometimes random acquaintances who just needed a place to not freeze to death that night. Privacy? Doesn't exist. A medieval bed isn't a sacred solo space. It's more like the sleeping version of public transport. Packed, slightly awkward, and every now and then someone coughs directly into your soul. Your new bedmates. On your left, a baker's apprentice. He talks in his sleep. You learn a lot about dough ratios. On your right, A grandmother with a terrifying grip and a suspiciously sharp elbow. She's also the warmest one in the bed. You're not letting go. At your feet, a child who may or may not have wet themselves earlier. You try not to think about it. This is fine. It's human heating. One blanket for bodies, a lot of shared body heat, and exactly zero boundaries. Oh, and don't forget the fleas. They are, how do we put this? Everywhere. A quick sidebar on medieval hygiene. You'd think, at least we're clean. Bathing is rare, as you already know. Clothes are reused, patched, slept in, and rarely washed. Sheets changed once a season. Maybe. Result? Everyone is itchy. Everyone. And because you're all in one bed, you're co-itchy. Solidarity through scratching. There's even a phrase from Old English records, to sleep fast. It doesn't mean quickly, it means to sleep deeply despite distractions. Like snoring. Like coughing. Like, vermin. You try your best. Let's talk about intimacy. No, not that kind. It gets weirdly close, emotionally. You lie in the dark, listening to everyone breathe. One person starts humming. Another mutters a prayer. You hear someone fart and someone else giggle. It's not glamorous, but it's human. And sometimes, when survival is the only thing you all have in common, that's enough to form a weird, snoring kind of bond. You're no longer sleeping alone. You're sleeping among. And it feels safer. Not cleaner. Not better. But safer. Bed rules and etiquette. Yes, there were rules. Believe it or not, medieval folks had bed-sharing etiquette. Some even wrote it down. Feet go at the foot. No turning around. You point your feet one way and commit. No hogging the blanket. Obvious. Enforced with elbows. Don't cough into someone's neck. Basic decency. Try not to die in the night. Rude. Oh, and if you're a guest, you sleep on the edge. If you fall out of the bed, that's your fault. These unwritten rules keep the peace. Mostly. Until someone sneezes directly into your ear. But hey, medieval winter, remember? And then there's the morning ritual. You wake up groggy, sweaty, and vaguely damp. Someone's arm is on your chest. Someone else is using your shoulder as a pillow. The child is now sideways. The old woman is gone. Possibly to start breakfast. Possibly to avoid you. You peel yourself out of the heap and stretch. Your bones hurt. Your neck crinks. But you're warm. Warm. You smile at the thought. Then realize you've got a flea in your ear. Beds were literal status symbols. The irony? You've just slept in luxury. Even a shared bed is a major upgrade from the barn, the floor, or no shelter at all. In wealthier homes, beds were prized furniture, so much so that they were passed down in wills. And not just the frame, the mattress, the feather stuffing, even the curtains. Yes, curtains. If you were really fancy, your bed had drapes, to keep in heat and keep out bugs. A four-poster bed wasn't just decorative. It was survival tech. Of course, you don't have curtains. You have an old blanket, 3 strangers, and a strong smell of onions. Still, it's something. The academic footnote. Fun fact, historians still debate how common communal sleeping really was. Some argue it was everywhere, an essential survival mechanism. Others say it depended on geography, culture, wealth, and the season. What's certain, you right now in this lumpy, sweaty bed, you're living the version that nobody wrote romantic poems about. You lie awake thinking. You're warmer than you've been in a week. But you also now understand that surviving winter means losing every sense of personal space you ever had. Beds are now group events. You whisper thank you to your bedmates as they sleep. Even the one who drooled on your collarbone. Because medieval winter teaches you one thing fast. Warmth matters more than pride. The sun barely rises, and the light it gives off isn't what you'd call warm. It's more like someone turned on a fluorescent bulb in a meat locker. You step outside the cottage, or rather, crawl out from the shared bed pile, peel off the sleep crust, and stumble to the door. As you open it, you're greeted by a harsh slap to the face. Not a person. The wind. You meet your new worst enemy, wind chill. You thought you understood cold. You didn't? What you've met until now was still cold. Now you've met moving cold. It has a personality. And that personality is petty and violent. The medieval countryside in winter doesn't just sit there being cold. It throws cold at you. No coat, no scarf, no windbreaker. Just a few sad layers of itchy wool, and a deep sense of regret for having left the pigsty. You press forward anyway. There's firewood to fetch. Always firewood to fetch. As you trudge across the snowy path, the wind howls through the bare branches. It whistles through every seam in your clothing. It creeps down your sleeves, up your tunic, into your soul. And just like that, you learn why people die from the wind. The physics of misery. Wind chill isn't a modern concept. The term came later, sure, but the effect? Oh, it's timeless. In fact, your body loses heat 25 times faster when exposed to wind in freezing temperatures. And you? You're basically a walking heat lamp wrapped in damp wool. Every gust strips away your warmth like a thief with no morals. It's not even that cold by thermometer standards, maybe hovering just below freezing, but with the wind, it feels like minus regret. And you're wearing what basically amounts to a potato sack in hope. Cover your ears, they say. Too bad you can't. Your ears go first. You feel them vanish. Not fall off, though that might happen later, but just disappear into numbness. Next your nose. Then your fingertips. Then your will to exist. You try to pull your hood tighter. It's not really a hood. It's a scrap of wool tied around your head like a fashion-conscious cabbage. You wonder what the villagers did to protect themselves from this. Spoiler, not much. Medieval cold defenses, laughably tragic. Sure, they had cloaks. Sometimes made of wool, sometimes sheepskin if you were lucky. They even had hoods with fun names like Leary Pipe, which sounds like a 14th century Pokemon. But these garments weren't windproof. They were basically portable blankets with sleeves. No zippers, no thermal linings, no Gore-Tex. You wrap yourself tighter, but every gust finds a new crack in your defenses. Worse still, you can't just stand around. You have to keep moving. Because if you stop, the cold wins. And in this time, there's no safety net. If you collapse in the snow, you're not being rescued. You're being buried. The roads don't help. You'd think roads would be your friends. Medieval roads are barely glorified footpaths. Most are just churned up mud, frozen solid into uneven, jagged shapes like nature's own Lego bricks, ready to snap your ankles. You try to walk carefully, but each step is a gamble. You're basically ice skating on misery. Oh, and let's not forget the surprise puddles under the snow. One misstep and you've got a wet foot. In this weather, that's practically a death sentence. Because drying socks doesn't happen. You now walk with one cold, squishy foot. A medieval classic. Travel is not encouraged. Here's a fun fact. In winter, most people didn't travel. Not because they were lazy. Because they weren't stupid. Going anywhere meant risking exposure, frostbite, robbery, or just plain getting lost in a wide-out blizzard where everything looks like the loading screen of a snow-themed video game. So unless you were delivering something important, like news, a sheep, or your last will and testament, you stayed put. The wind takes a sudden turn and smacks snow into your eyes. You wipe them with your already wet sleeve. This is fine. Everything is fine. Let's check in on your face. Your cheeks. They're red. Not the cute, flushed kind. More like raw steak in the wind kind. Your nose is doing that thing where it runs just enough to be annoying but not enough to be helpful. You sniff. Again. You wipe it. Again. It's a losing battle. And you discover why medieval folks often had permanently windburned skin by spring. It wasn't fashion. It was friction. Why the wind matters so much. This isn't just about discomfort. The wind can kill you before you freeze solid. Here's how. It dehydrates you. It saps your energy, your burning calories just to stay warm. It increases your risk of hypothermia, which starts with confusion, then slurred speech, then, you guessed it, face planting into a snowdrift. And remember, you can't exactly call for help. The village is scattered, the paths are empty, and screaming into the wind is like whispering into soup. Speaking of soup, you think about food again. You're walking now just to stay warm. There's no destination, just motion. But your stomach starts complaining. And all you can think about is soup. Steaming, hot, liquid hope. Except remember, your soup froze yesterday. You'd kill for a turnip. Instead, you find a small patch of half-frozen grass poking through the snow. You stare at it like it's filet mignon. Your body is cold. But your mind? Fully cooked. What did they do when wind struck hard? Some records suggest villagers literally hid from the wind. They'd gather in cellars, lean-tos, animal sheds, anywhere that blocked the gusts. Entire families might spend whole days indoors under blankets, wrapped in shared misery and layers of scratchy wool. Even then, people would still fall ill. Cold-induced illness was common. Fevers, coughs, even pneumonia. But the real killer? Just being too poor to afford enough wood to keep the fire going all night. No fire equals no heat equals no chance. Historians argue over just how many people died in winter each year. There's little documentation. Death was just common. Accepted. Part of life. But wind? Wind was feared. Because it didn't just chill you. It haunted you. Your nose won't stop dripping. Your joints crack like cold twigs. And now you're coughing, a dry, hacking sound that echoes through the freezing stillness like a warning bell. Congratulations. You're sick. Not just, I'll sleep it off, sick. You're congested, freezing, possibly delirious, and still expected to chop firewood, sick. And in medieval times? That's basically a death sentence with bonus chores. You try to stay in bed. That's adorable. You think maybe I should rest. You're shivering so badly it feels like internal maracas, and your throat's drier than a church biscuit. So you pull the wool blanket, okay, burlap sack, over your head and try to do what any reasonable person would do. Sleep it off. Except there's no such thing as a sick day in your medieval winter wonderland. If you can stand, you can work. If you can crawl, you can feed chickens. And if you can't even do that, well, there's always the barn. With the pigs. Again. And if you're thinking someone will bring you soup, that someone is you and the soup's frozen. Medieval medicine is a strong word. You decide, maybe foolishly, that you should see a doctor. A medieval doctor isn't really a doctor. It's more like an old guy who knows how to bleed people. A traveling herbalist who smells strongly of onions and goat. Or your neighbor who once rubbed lard on a wound and it healed, so now he thinks he's a healer. You trudge through snow and wind and mucus to find help. Eventually you do. They examine you briefly. You cough. They nod gravely. And then you hear the words you were hoping to avoid. Let's get some leeches. A quick tour of medieval cures. Your options are limited. Not in theory. Oh no, medieval people had lots of theories. But in results? Yeah, not great. Here's what might be offered to you. Bloodletting, based on the idea that your body has 4 humors, and yours are currently imbalanced. Best way to fix that? Slice your arm open and drain a pint. And mustard plasters, a spicy paste smeared on your chest to draw out the illness. Mostly just makes you smell like an angry sausage. Tying herbs to your wrist, like a medieval essential oil bracelet. May include rosemary, garlic, or something vaguely cursed. Inhaling dried sheep dung smoke. Yes, this is real. Don't do it. In some areas, they might even recommend a prayer vigil. That's not a metaphor. You literally sit in a cold church, coughing your lungs out, while everyone prays that you survive. Medieval self-care? 0/10. Would not recommend. People die of just a cold all the time. Today you get a sore throat and think I'll take a nap. Back then, a sore throat might be your obituary. Because what starts as a cold turns into a fever, then chills, then delirium. You sweat through your only dry tunic. You shiver under straw. You hallucinate that your neighbor is a talking goose. Your body has no reserves left. No vitamins, no hydration, no proper food. You're working through sickness instead of resting. Your immune system is on strike. And if you don't die from the illness itself, You might die from the treatment. Bleeding someone weakens them even further. And nobody's sterilizing anything. That rusty knife? That reused needle? They're bringing more than just cures to your bloodstream. Some historians believe infection from treatment may have killed more people than the disease ever did. Let that sink in. Meanwhile, people still expect you to show up. You're coughing violently in the corner, and the village elder pokes his head in like, "Hey, think you can help with the roof thatching today?" No one's being cruel. They just can't afford to lose a pair of hands. Every person counts in a tight-knit, labor-based community. If someone's sick for too long, they become a burden. And burdens in the Middle Ages don't always get gently cared for. There are whispers, quiet but sharp, that you're lingering, that you've gone soft, that maybe you should be sent to the sheep hut until you're better. Or well, until you're not. There's no such thing as medical privacy. Forget HIPAA. Here everyone knows you're sick. They know when you started coughing. They know what color your phlegm is. They know you fell asleep in the goat shed last night and woke up mumbling about fire demons. You're the village entertainment and cautionary tale. And if things take a darker turn, say your fever spikes and you start babbling nonsense, they might assume you're possessed. Or worse, cursed. Let's just say medieval mental health support isn't exactly robust. Hope comes in warm bread and tea, if you're lucky. Sometimes someone might drop off a warm stone wrapped in cloth. A neighbor might lend you their second blanket, the one with only a few holes. Someone's daughter brings over lukewarm barley tea with something floating in it. And for a moment, you believe you might make it. Not because of the herbs. Not because of the lard bandage. But because of the simple, desperate act of human kindness. That's the real medicine. That's the part no textbook can quite explain. But statistically, you're not doing great. We don't know exactly how many people died from basic illnesses in medieval winters. Records are spotty at best. But historians estimate child mortality was astronomically high. And adult deaths from respiratory issues, untreated infections, and starvation were common. Getting sick wasn't a blip. It was a fork in the road. One direction, you slowly get better over weeks, weaker but wiser. The other? Your name becomes a murmured anecdote during supper. And worst of all, your chores still need doing even in death. You're sitting by the door, wrapped in something that used to be a sack of grain, coughing into your elbow, stomach growling like a wolf, and outside? The wind is howling like it's trying to knock. The air smells like frozen mud and burning dung. You glance at your empty bowl and wonder if this is how people slowly stop existing. Welcome to the second worst part of medieval winter. Right after the actual cold, you're about to get very, very hungry. Winter doesn't mean rest, it means panic. It's the middle of January, or at least you think so. No one has a calendar, and the village sundial's been buried under snow since Christmas. But time doesn't matter now. What matters is this. The granary? Half empty. The pigs? Slaughtered last month. The garden? Frozen since November. And your stomach? Completely out of patience. Here's a hard truth. If you're not working in the winter, you're dying in it. There's no such thing as a cozy off-season. No hibernation. No Netflix and furs. You either chop wood, patch roofs, scavenge frozen fields for something, anything, or you waste away quietly under a frostbitten blanket. The cellar holds disappointment. You shuffle down to the root cellar hoping for potatoes. Or even a decent onion. What you find is a cracked wooden bin with shriveled parsnips. 2 cabbages that have started fermenting on their own. A single turnip which might just be a rock in disguise. You scrape the mold off a carrot. It fights back. Even the rats gave up on this place last week. You sigh and take what you can because hunger makes you humble. Eating becomes weirdly creative. What do you eat in a medieval winter? Well, anything that won't immediately kill you. That includes frozen black bread, so hard you have to soak it in water before gnawing like a determined beaver. Pottage, a never-ending stew of whatever's around. Lentils, grain, boiled weeds, and last week's pottage, which was also made of the previous week's pottage. Gruel, basically warm sadness. Salted meat, if you're lucky. If not, salted something that once walked. You find yourself eyeing odd things too. That stale shoe with the soft leather? That boiled bark tea your neighbor claims has nutrients? That rat that maybe died today? Nothing's off the table because there is no table, only desperation. Starvation is a slow, cold whisper. You try to ration your portions, but the cold makes you burn calories faster. You're working just to stay warm, chopping wood, hauling water, stomping through snow to beg for eggs. Your fingers are numb and cracked, and your thoughts feel floaty. Starvation doesn't come in all at once. It sneaks in. First you're tired. Then you're dizzy. You forget things. You hallucinate that bread has a voice. Your strength fades and the chores don't stop. No one says anything directly, but the way people stop asking you to help. Yeah, they've noticed. In the Middle Ages, famine doesn't have a scream. It has a silence. There's no aid coming. No soup kitchens. No social safety nets. No emergency food rations tucked away in a warehouse. Your community is all you have. And if they're hungry, you're on your own. The lord of the land? Maybe he stored some extra grain. But unless you're useful, he's not sharing. And what he gives you might be rotten, bug-infested, or mixed with sawdust to make it stretch further. Some lords even taxed firewood in winter. Imagine that. You freeze to death while technically in debt. When food runs out, people do weird things. This is the part of winter no one wants to talk about. But historians whisper about it. In letters. In trial records. In accounts passed down like family secrets. When food runs out, people boil leather belts. Eat candle tallow. Cook straw with weak broth. Brew bark, moss, or even linen fibers into tea. And in the darkest corners of the worst famines, there are rumors of worse. We won't go there. Not tonight. But let's just say hunger breaks more than just your body. You dream about spring, but that's a trick. Every day you tell yourself just hold on till spring. But here's the truth no one tells you on the first frost. Spring is not salvation. It's just mud and melting disappointment. Crops don't grow overnight. The ground stays hard. Animals are still dead. There are no fresh greens, no sudden feasts. Just more waiting. Some years the hunger gap stretched from February into May. So when you lie in bed, stomach folded in on itself like a bitter letter, whispering, almost there, it's more of a prayer than a plan. And yet, you keep going. Because that's what people did. Somehow. You wake up one morning and find a crust of bread left on the shelf. You split it 3 ways. You melt snow for water. You chew slowly. A child down the road finds a clutch of frozen eggs. A neighbor uncovers a half-buried turnip. Someone remembers a fish trap under the ice. You don't feast. You survive. And that, in this bitter, brittle world, is more than most. Even hunger becomes normal. Eventually, you stop feeling starving. You just feel empty. And when food does return, your first fresh onion, your first new green sprig, you're almost afraid to eat it. Like it might vanish if you do. And in a weird way, you miss the quiet. Because hunger, for all its cruelty, makes every bite afterward feel like a miracle. You wake up coughing. Again. The cold air feels like it's scratching your lungs from the inside out, and your nose is, well, you can't feel your nose anymore. That's either a very bad sign or just standard procedure by now. But today you're determined. Enough is enough. You want to understand how anyone, is supposed to stay warm in this place. Like, was there a plan? A trick? A system? You open your eyes to the thick smoke staining the wooden beams above you and think, there has to be a better way. Spoiler, there isn't. Welcome to the medieval heating system. So you venture outside to ask around. You talk to the blacksmith. He shrugs and points to a pile of smoldering dung. Fire, he says. That's the whole strategy. You visit a slightly better off neighbor with stone walls and an actual chimney. She points to a giant open hearth that's belching smoke like a dragon with bronchitis. No flue, no insulation, just rocks stacked in a way that mostly doesn't catch fire. This is what counts as central heating. And if you're wondering why no one invented better, well, they kind of did. They just didn't share. The hypocaust, a Roman miracle, lost to time. You've maybe heard whispers of hypocausts, an ancient Roman underfloor heating system that pumped warm air through channels beneath stone tiles. Sounds incredible, right? Too bad they basically disappeared with the Roman Empire. By the time you're shivering in the 14th century, those clever setups are either ruins or legendary folklore. Some say the old ruins had warm floors, an elder tells you sipping watery ale. But they also say chickens used to talk. So yeah, not helpful. The hearth is the heart of the home, and the smoke. Back in your little hut, the heating strategy is simple. 1. Start a fire in the middle of the room. 2. Hope it stays lit. 3. Hope it doesn't kill you. Medieval houses rarely had chimneys. Most were just open holes in the roof to maybe let the smoke out. But most of that smoke stayed inside. Your eyes burn. Your lungs wheeze. Everything smells like scorched goat hair. And yet this is considered cozy. Oh, and if you're lying in bed near the rafters, that's actually the worst spot. Smoke rises. People cough their way into chronic bronchitis long before anyone had a name for it. You might be too cold to feel the fire. Let's talk about thermal inefficiency. Your walls are thin. Your floors are dirt. Your windows, if you have them, are just oiled parchment that leaks wind like a grudge. You build up a decent fire, sit right next to it, and somehow, still cold. 'Cause guess what? Fire doesn't heat rooms in the Middle Ages. It heats faces, maybe fingers, occasionally toes. But it doesn't last and it doesn't spread. And when the fire dies, you don't just get chilly. You get stone cold, soul deep, frostbitten cold. Ashes, ashes, everything's a mess. Keeping the fire alive isn't romantic or cinematic. It's exhausting. You chop wood or steal some. You haul it back through snow. You dry it indoors and hope it doesn't mold. You feed the fire all night, waking up every 2 hours to check it. And in the morning, you're surrounded by ash. Everything's coated in gray, like some sad post-apocalyptic baking show. Your clothes, your food, your teeth. Yes, your teeth. Try not to burn your house down. The medieval fire hazard is no joke. With no fireplaces or grates, fires often sprawled directly on the floor. One stray spark and your straw bedding becomes a torch. Wooden beams? Kindling. Roof thatch? Accelerant. Entire villages went up in flames because someone sneezed too hard near a candle. And the worst part? There's no fire brigade. No water pump. Just a bucket chain and prayers. It was common wisdom. If your neighbor's house is burning, start removing your roof tiles immediately. That's medieval disaster planning for you. Ever heard of peat? You're about to smell it forever. Firewood runs out fast. So people started using alternatives. Peat, dried chunks of decomposed plant muck dug from bogs. Smokes like a smoldering boot. A dried cow dung, the smell? Aggressive. But hey, it burns. Straw bundles, fast and fleeting like a medieval sparkler. Peat is especially popular in parts of Europe with fewer trees. Works sure. But it also turns your home into something between a barbecue pit and a moldy closet. And once your cloak smells like peat smoke, it will never smell like anything else again. Hot rocks and bed warmers, medieval hacks that kind of worked. Let's give credit where it's due. People got creative. They heated stones in the fire, then wrapped them in cloth to tuck under the bedding. Cozy for 20 minutes. Wealthier folks used bed warmers, metal pans filled with coals, slid between sheets to preheat the bed. Yes, it also occasionally lit sheets on fire. Some shared body heat with animals or, well, roommates. You 3 people and a goose. That's the premium package. Of course, if you're poor, your version of a bed warmer is, hug this wet dog and try not to die. Cold air makes you holy. When you asked why people didn't try harder to heat their homes, someone quoted the church. Apparently, suffering builds character. And also virtue. Cold bodies meant you weren't giving in to sinful luxury. Warmth? That was for the pampered or the damned. So next time your toes are numb and you can't sleep because your breath is frosting on your eyelashes, just remember, you're probably going to heaven. Or frostbite. No comfort, just coping. You pull your cloak tighter, stare at the embers glowing dimly in the hearth, and realize, this is as warm as you'll be all day. No insulation. No thermal underwear. No radiator to click on. Just this smoldering pile of smoke, ash, and effort. And tomorrow, you'll wake up and do it again. Because there's no alternative. You don't heat your home in the Middle Ages. You endure it. Your ears perk up. Did someone just say, festival? You're huddled in the corner of a smoky tavern, wrapped in every piece of wool and regret you could find, when the words hit you like a warm pie to the face. The winter feasts tonight. Wait, a festival? With warmth? And food? And possibly joy? You leap to your feet or try to, your knees crack like frozen twigs, and rush to find out more. Because after weeks of cold, hunger, and being aggressively ignored by pigs, you'll take any excuse to be around something vaguely cheerful. You thought this was going to be a party. The whole village seems to be shuffling toward the center square. There are torches, music, laughter that might be real or might be people exhaling while grimacing. You're optimistic. That's your first mistake. Someone hands you a cup of ale. It's sour, warmish, possibly moved here via horse bladder. But you smile and sip. You're here for the vibes. Then comes the feast. A turnip. A crust of bread with what may or may not be lard. A handful of dried peas that taste like sadness. You chew slowly, pretending it's roast duck. It is very much not roast duck. But hey, there's fire. And people. And for a brief moment you think, I might survive this after all. Welcome to the winter festival, cold, drunk, and hopeful. Let's be real, winter festivals were not holidays in the modern sense. They were often born out of desperation and superstition. Winter solstice? That's when the sun stops getting weaker. People lit fires, rang bells, and threw loud parties to scare away the darkness. Because deep down, no one was entirely sure the sun would come back. By the 14th century, many of these festivals had merged into something semi-Christian, semi-pagan, and entirely freezing. The vibe? A strange mix of, please bring back daylight. Let's drink until we forget we're dying. Or what if we dressed the goat like a bishop? Did someone say Yule goat? Yes. And it's not a metaphor. In Scandinavia, people celebrated July, where goats played a major symbolic role. Sometimes they were sacrificed, yikes. Other times they just existed to be weirdly festive. Later they'd evolve into straw ornaments and eventually the precursor to Santa Claus. You don't fully understand this, but you do see a man chasing a goat in a red cloak and you decide not to ask questions. Meanwhile, in Central Europe, children dress up in Krampus-like costumes to scare the evil spirits away. One of them throws snow at your face. You cough and whisper, "Merry whatever," and move on. Candlemas, Saturnalia, and midwinter mashups. The winter season was a swirling mess of overlapping traditions. Saturnalia from Roman times. Role reversals, feasting, chaos. Candlemas in February, blessing of candles and definitely not cozy. Carnival season approaching. Masks, dancing, and cold mud. You catch wind of a ritual circle in the woods where people shout at trees. That tracks. No one really knows where one festival ends and another begins. Historians still argue about it, and honestly, it feels like everyone just wanted a reason to be loud, drunk, and slightly less cold. You try to enjoy it. Really, you do. You join the dancing. It's less graceful celebration and more shuffling while trying not to fall. The snow is slush now, and your shoes are more holes than leather. Someone grabs your hands, spins you around, and you almost eat frozen mud. Still, it's kind of fun. People laugh. Kids toss firewood onto a communal blaze. For a little while the town feels alive, like it's fighting back. You lift your cup again, it's still warm horse bladder temperature, and toast the sky. The stars don't blink, but you swear the moon is smirking, feasting on fumes. By feast, we mean everything they didn't have to save. Most winter festivals used preserved or borderline rotten food. Salted pork, if you were lucky, pickled cabbage, dried apples, ale so sour it could sanitize wounds. You chew with polite nods and pretend your stomach isn't quietly weeping. Some brave soul roasts a rat. You pretend you didn't see that. In fancier towns, people might slaughter a pig just for the occasion. That's a big deal. You hear someone whisper, "They're eating kidney pie over in the manor," like it's royal gossip. You settle for burnt onions and, is that a pie made of turnip and sawdust? Could be worse. Could be just sawdust. Fire jumping, an actual thing. At one point, someone builds a large fire and yells, "Jump over it." For good luck. You stare. Your feet say no. Your frostbitten toes say, "Absolutely not." Then someone jumps and people cheer. So obviously peer pressure wins. You take a running start, leap, barely clear the flames, and land in a pile of straw. You're fine. You smell like disappointment and singed cloth, but you're alive. And that, in this century, is pretty much the definition of thriving. Hope is cheap but necessary. These festivals didn't stop the cold. They didn't make the food better or the bed softer. But they gave people a reason to gather. And in an age where survival is an achievement, a reason to smile was priceless. Some even saw these nights as magical, thin times when spirits wandered and wishes might matter. You close your eyes and make a wish. Please let spring come soon. You open them to see someone vomiting behind a hay cart. Yep, still the Middle Ages. You walk home colder than ever but smiling. The festival winds down. People stagger back to huts and barns. The fire dims. The music fades into hiccups and mumbling. You're not full. You're not warm. But somehow tonight didn't feel like dying. It felt like remembering why you want to live. Your cloak's soaked. Your breath fogs. You step carefully through the snow, humming a tune you just heard for the first time. It's off-key. And perfect. You wake up to birdsong. Which is strange because you're pretty sure birds haven't made a sound in weeks. You sit up, carefully because your neck still doesn't bend right after that sleeping on frozen turnip sack incident, and listen. Yeah. A very enthusiastic chirp. The pig in the corner grunts. You glance outside the barn door. It's lighter. Not warm, not yet. But the sky isn't steel gray. It's more like a dirty dishwater blue, which, after months of eternal gloom, feels practically tropical. You survived. Kind of. Spring? Don't get cocky. You limp out into the open air like a fantasy hero returning from a long, slow-motion war montage. Sunlight hits your eyes and your first thought is ouch. Your second is, finally? Spring. Then the wind slaps you in the face like a debt collector. No, not spring. Not really. Just slightly less winter. Welcome to the muddy, deceptive, bone-deep wet month of March. In the Middle Ages, that's still cold enough to ruin your spirit season. Your boots, what's left of them, immediately soak through. The snow melts, and everything gets worse. The first thaw isn't joyful. It's gross. The roads become mud rivers. Everything smells faintly of manure, rot, and the goat you accidentally stepped on last week. You wade through puddles that might also be toilet runoff. Your cloak gets heavier by the minute, but still you're alive. Your joints crack less. You can actually feel your nose again. You've only coughed twice this morning. That's practically a renaissance. You're alive, but the pantry isn't. Bad news, the food situation hasn't improved. That winter festival last month cleared out whatever was left in the communal storage. Now it's a season of waiting. Waiting for crops. Waiting for eggs. Waiting for that one guy who said he'd go hunting and never came back. And it's still too early to plant most things. Soil's frozen. Seeds will just sit there, sulking. But you nibble on your final dried beet like it's a victory snack. Because it kind of is. The village wakes up slowly. People start emerging from their homes. Blinking, pale, shaggy like winter cryptids. They stretch. They cough. They complain about the same things as before. The cold, the taxes, the rats. But there's less edge in their voices now. More squinting toward the horizon, wondering if that thing in the sky is a sun or just a hallucination. A child laughs. That feels illegal somehow. The new season of suffering begins. Here's the historical kicker. Spring didn't always mean things get better. It often meant, now you're sick and exhausted. Diseases spread easily during the thaw. Wet homes meant mold. Weak immune systems meant everyone caught something. Historians still debate whether the death rates actually dipped in spring or just changed shape. Less hypothermia, more dysentery. So while your fingers are no longer icicles, your stomach sounds like it's chewing itself. But hey, no one said the Middle Ages had a comfort phase. You've changed. A little. Your hair is longer. Your limbs are stiffer. You've learned that firewood is worth more than gold, and a warm pig is a better friend than most people. You've also developed a sixth sense for where the wind will stab you next. You've seen things, smelled things, licked icicles off questionable surfaces. You've laughed at a goat in a cape, cried over cold soup, and seriously considered cuddling a turnip for heat. You, my friend, are a medieval winter survivor. That's a title earned in frostbite and spite. And now, you wait. There's not much else to do. Not yet. Work will begin soon. Plowing, sowing, building, cleaning, pretending your thatched roof didn't collapse in January. But for now it's about holding on. You watch as another faint breeze moves through the trees. They're still bare. But not for long. You think about last night's dream. Something about bread that didn't break your teeth. You sigh, stretch, then cough up a small piece of last month. One last cold breath. Night falls again. The sky is clearer. Stars peek out shyly like they forgot how to be seen. It's still cold, but not like before. The cold doesn't reach inside anymore. Doesn't fill your bones with dread. Just a surface-level shiver like a memory. You wrap your cloak tighter, lean back against the barn wall and smile. Maybe tomorrow the mud will dry. Maybe the birds will keep singing. Maybe, just maybe, next winter won't come so fast. You remember it, don't you? That first breath of cold air. That moment your eyes snapped open and suddenly you were there. In a nameless medieval village in the dead of winter. No shoes. No fire. And no idea how you were going to survive the night. At first you might have thought, okay, this is just the challenge mode. But now, after everything, now you know better. That wasn't a challenge. That was the medieval winter saying, welcome to the long game, try not to die. Dressing like an onion didn't help. Very quickly you realized something most history books skip over. In the Middle Ages, warmth was a luxury. You stacked layers, wool if you could find it, linen if you couldn't, old curtains if you were desperate. You looked like a walking cabbage. And still, somehow the cold always found a way in. It wasn't about thickness. It was about poverty. The rich had sheep, hearths, and padded cloaks. You had a patched-up tunic that flapped in the wind like a flag of surrender. Eventually, you started eyeing the livestock pen and thinking, maybe sleeping with pigs isn't that bad. You slept in a pigsty and that's okay. Yep, you did it. You climbed into a bed of hay and pig bodies one desperate night, not for comfort, just for body heat. It was warm. It smelled like life. And for the first time in days, you didn't wake up shivering. You weren't proud, but you weren't sorry either. Survival? Survival doesn't care about your pride. Fire was a full-time job. You used to think starting a fire was easy. Flick a lighter. Push a button. Done. But back then, fire was an event. An ordeal. You begged flint to spark. You twisted sticks like your life depended on it, because it did. Your fingers went numb just holding the wood. And if, by some miracle, you got the flame going, the smoke filled the room. The heat fled out the roof. And all you did was manage to roast one side of your body while the other still felt like a popsicle. You weren't even mad. You were just disappointed. You ate something. The hunger crept in slowly, then loudly. Then it roared. You scraped the bottom of the storage bins and found a crust of stale rye bread, maybe a turnip, maybe the soul of a potato. You considered boiling your leather shoes. You probably would have done it too. You told yourself, it's protein adjacent. But the truth is you weren't eating to be full. You were eating to stay conscious. Nature was not on your side. Let's talk toilets. Because yeah, those existed. Just not in any way that made sense. In the middle of the night, wrapped in cloth and clutching your knees, you made your way across frozen ground to an outdoor pit. You prayed the icy ledge wouldn't crack. You prayed the wind would die down. You prayed nobody had used it before you. Recently. Sanitation? Let's just say you learned to hold it. Sickness didn't ask permission. At some point your body gave out. The chills came from inside this time. You coughed. You burned with fever. You begged for a rest. The village healer gave you goat urine and clove oil. Maybe told you to tie a frog to your ankle. You tried it. You were desperate. You weren't sure if it helped. You were sure the frog didn't appreciate it. People looked at you differently once you got sick. Less like a neighbor, more like a problem. In the Middle Ages, being ill didn't make you a victim. It made you a burden. You tried to ask for help. Nobody cared. You remember walking up to the Lord's estate, half frozen, teeth chattering, asking for a little wood for the fire. He looked at you and asked, "Did you pay your hearth tax?" No tax, no logs. You laughed, a dry little wheeze in your throat because it was all so absurd. But it wasn't funny. It was just how the world worked. You weren't part of the system. You were part of the scenery. You adapted. One day, without noticing, you stopped feeling shocked. You stopped flinching when the wind slapped your face. You knew which corner of the hut got the morning sun. You could tell what kind of frost it was just by the way your knees ached. You became a cold weather machine. Your ears were always red. Your hands always cracked. But somehow you were still standing. And sometimes, you even laughed. Yeah, you laughed. Not often, but enough. You laughed when the pig rolled over and accidentally spooned you. You laughed when you found a dried apple and thought it was treasure. You laughed when the village tried to hold a winter feast, and it was just sour beer and bread crusts. You laughed because what else could you do? And in those moments, something in you stayed warm. Just enough. Spring didn't come early, but it came. Eventually the days stopped hurting. The air thawed just a little. The birds came back, singing like nothing ever happened. The trees teased you with little green shoots, like nature saying, "Hey, sorry about that whole frostbite thing." You didn't cry. Not outwardly. But a part of you did collapse a little. With relief. With disbelief. With pride. You survived. That means something. You didn't conquer the winter. Nobody really does. But you outlasted it. And in a world like that, that makes you a champion. You kept your fingers, your humor, your sense of self. You discovered that surviving isn't always noble or poetic or cinematic. Sometimes it's just dirty, awkward, itchy, and full of pig smell. But it's still survival. And it's still worth celebrating. This wasn't just your story. You may not realize it yet, but you just walked in the shoes of millions of people across centuries. Ordinary villagers. Mothers, farmers, children, beggars. People who didn't write books or lead wars. People who simply lived, through frost, famine, and fatigue. History tends to skip over them. But they were real. And now, because of this journey, you've shared something of theirs. Their silence. Their endurance. Their cold. And now, back in your warm bed. Here you are again. In the modern world. Blankets thick. Heater humming. Electric light spilling across your walls like magic. And you might catch yourself thinking just for a second. Was that all just a story? Maybe. But maybe not. Because now, when the power goes out for an hour, or the heat drops in your apartment, or you catch a whiff of burning wood on a winter walk, You'll remember what it was like to not have those things, to really be cold. And that memory will live in you like a fire tucked deep in your chest. So remember this journey, not just because it was hard, but because you made it through. And because someone, somewhere, in some very real past, made it through too. The fire is low now, just soft embers glowing under a thin layer of ash. You watch them flicker, not urgently, not with heat, but like old friends whispering a story that's finally come to its end. Outside, the wind has gone quiet. No howling, no rattling doors, just the occasional creak of a timber beam settling into the stillness. You pull the blanket, or what's left of it, closer to your shoulders. The rough wool scratches a little, but somehow it feels comforting now. Like it knows every inch of your skin, every night you shivered through together. Your eyes feel heavy, but not from exhaustion this time. Just calm. Somewhere out there, the stars are humming. Maybe the world hasn't changed much. The food's still bad, the roof still leaks, and the pigs still snore louder than you do. But you're here. You've seen the darkest part of the year, the worst of the cold. And still you've held on, one soggy footstep at a time. And now it's quiet enough to breathe again. Quiet enough to sleep. So close your eyes, friend. Let the wind fade behind the walls. Let the embers hum their lullaby. You've walked the long winter night, and now you rest on the edge of something softer. Spring may not be here yet, but peace? Peace is close. Sleep well.